Hello, everybody. Dan D. Federicis from Saratoga Report, and I'm here with Mike Piazza, who is the founder and managing partner of Zilla Racing Stables, a Capital Region-based thoroughbred horse ownership group that's been around for many years. And Mike's probably having a slightly better week than you are because, Mike, you started off Sunday, the week, with not one win, but two down at Belmont Park. Congratulations. That's great. Can you tell us a little bit about the two races?
Yeah, they were much needed wins. We were kind of off to a slow start this year. We started the year 1 for 25. But we know our process where we place our horses is sound, and that's just part of the game. You're gonna, go through these streaks. So we don't really panic. We know if we just put our horses in the right spots where they belong, eventually the wins will come. And then we felt a little bit like when we won with Dracan, Sonic Speed was also entered in that race, and we had targeted him for the 3 Life $35,000 race, the week before, and I think twice actually, and they both came off the turf, and he would have been much better spotted there. But because of those 2 races came off the turf, we had to get Sonic Speed running coming off the layoff. So he was in a race technically where, we would have preferred to be in a softer spot. Dracan, who ended up winning that race, started his career with Brad Cox. I think Brad saw him as a dirt horse. He even entered him, as an MTO, as a 2-year-old in Saratoga. And, the initial reports were very positive with Dracan, but then he kind of really didn't do much. And then we moved him around a little bit and then figured out it was just turf. Turf all along was what his calling was. And then we shipped him out to Texas to kind of just give him some softer competition, let him mature. We felt out there we could run for a 2 Life 25 claiming race. And they don't usually claim turf horses out there like at that price. So we felt like we had an opportunity to put him against softer horses, get some momentum, and give him a chance to develop. We really liked him when we bought him. So after we did pretty well with him out in Texas, we felt it was time to kind of bring him to the big leagues and call him up from the minors and, see what he could deliver. And, as we thought about even scratching Dracan, and mainly was because he had just shipped in from Texas, and it was a race that popped up on the overnights. So it wasn't something that we had pointed to, but he was doing well, and he obviously ran a really nice race. So it was really good to see him win for lots of reasons, not only our losing streak, but also because like I said, it was a horse we bought at the auction we really liked and kind of got off the wrong foot with Brad. And so that was really nice. And then Cannon Fire, she's a filly we bought as a yearling. She won first time out maiden special weight last year. She developed some bone bruising and she needed a few months off. We gave her a few months, but because she's a turf horse, New York bred, she actually got an advantage in that we decided to just give her the whole winter off. So she got a lot more time than she technically needed for her injury. But there was no sense of bringing her back here during the winter. So we just gave her more time to mature, and she ran a really big race for us. And, we thought there was a chance she could have got claimed. But it was worth the risk. It was $50,000 and she ran a big race. So now we have starter 50 eligibility, New York bred allowance. And so we're really happy with her.
That's great. And in full disclosure, folks, I am a partner with Zilla Racing Stables. Mike's got me to the winner's circle at Saratoga with Miss Liana, if you recall, and I am a small percentage owner of Sonic Speed. And we're going to be talking about claiming. That's how I got involved with Zilla. We're going to be, folks, for those of you that have dabbled in ownership or are considering dabbling in ownership, stick around in this interview in just a couple minutes. We're going to talk about the claiming end of the game. And I'm going to say right now that when we get there, that is a great way to break into ownership at a very reasonable cost, especially with Zilla that offers some lower percentage options to kind of dip your toe in the water. But congratulations on that great Sunday, Mike. And in fact, I will go right right into claiming, because you buy horses at auctions. And we're going to talk about the Timonium auctions in Maryland that Mike spent several days at just a week or two ago in a few minutes as well. But for now, do you agree with me that and I think you do, the claiming the claiming options, especially the ones from Zilla, but there's others. But that is a great way to break into ownership at a pretty modest cost.
For sure. When you buy young horses at an auction, you're buying a really unknown product, and it takes often a lot of time to even find out what you got. You buy a yearling, they haven't even had a saddle on their back yet. And here you are, trying to project 2 years out, have this horse winning races on the big stage in New York. It's a real tough challenge. And even when you buy a 2-year-old, they usually breeze 1 furlong, sometimes 2. But they can trick you, over 1 furlong. A lot of horses can look pretty good. It doesn't mean it's going to equate to a racetrack where they have to go much further. So there's a lot of challenges, and you end up investing a lot of money to just find out, hey, maybe you didn't buy much horse. So you have to be able to stomach the downside of buying the young horses, but they also come with the upside. Claiming is kind of you already know what you're kind of getting into right from the start, and you get instant feedback. You have a horse on paper with some form, you claim it, depending on how the horse runs, what level he ran at, and how he comes out of that claiming race physically. You already know what you have. So it's up to you to manage that horse to make sure you're, assessing his ability accurately, addressing any issues which may move him up and improve his form. But you can instantly put them in a race where they're going to be competitive. So I kind of look at, buying a young horse at an auction is kind of like that exciting Christmas present that's under the tree. It's wrapped and you don't know what's in there, but you're really excited to find out. Sometimes you're disappointed. You open the box and it's not something you were hoping for, at least when you were a child. And claiming is kind of it's the present that's already it's already unwrapped. It's there. You already know what it is. So you won't get as much of excitement, from the unknown. But whether you own a horse as a youngster or you claim a horse, I don't know. I feel like it's just as exciting. When they race, you're still going to get the same goosebumps when they're in the starting gate, the paddock, and then obviously when they run a winning race, it's it's so exciting, and it's kind of why we do it.
And you've you I think it was last year you had a picnic for your owners. If you give you a little bit of notice, they can come visit the horses with the trainer's approval, certain times and so forth. You've got all that, right? That's part of ownership, of seeing your horse just work out, do a breeze, or get in the stall, stop by. You've offered all that, and you've got some good trainers too. List the trainers you're currently working with, if you could.
Yeah, we've used a bunch. Ray Handel, Linda Rice, Orlando Noda, Danny Gargan, Brittany Russell, Tom Morley, Diodoro. We've worked with a bunch. Previously we worked with Brad Cox, Karen McLaughlin, guys like that. But ultimately we like just spreading things around. All these trainers, they're all different. They all offer different things. And when we get new partners that join us, I try to let them know what the pluses and minuses are of each individual trainer. Some trainers win more races, they can get more out of a horse, but they may lack the communication. They don't tell you as much as you would like to know. Some trainers tell you everything and they give you all the information. They're very welcoming when you come to the barn, but they may be at an earlier point in their career and they're not going to be at the top of their game quite yet. And so you kind of just know these things, that there's going to be some growing pains with the younger trainer, but you're getting communication, that, you may really find a lot of value. And some owners don't care about communication. They just want their horses to run the best races. So there's just a mix of quality that they may have. And the more we work with different trainers, the more I learn. And the more experience our partners get. They get to see different training philosophies. So yeah, like, we really enjoy it. And, like on Twitter and social media, there's always this back and forth, like this trainer is doing this and this trainer is doing that. And like, that's the unfortunate part of the game, is like, there's so many unknowns. But I just think it's so unfair that we, can almost like call people out for doing things that we really don't know for sure they're even doing. And there's all these protocols in place. And, I just have to assume that, like, if a trainer has a valid trainer license and he's eligible to be a trainer in a particular state, that, like, I can trust using him. So that's the disappointing.
Can I interrupt you on that spot? Can I interrupt you there? Because I came to you and I had my own stable, but I didn't have your knowledge, your experience, and you had the ability with several horses and your knowledge to be more forceful with trainers, because there's a certain dynamic there, and I didn't have that ability, and that was one of the reasons I liked sticking with you, is because you fired trainers. Now, it's been mostly good relationships, but these are business relationships, and sometimes you have to kind of, hey, we're the owner. And I appreciate that about you. And you've pushed when you've needed to push. You've got great relationships with your trainers. I've seen the interaction, but you can also push when you need to.
Yeah. I mean, we, separated from Brad Cox, and I told him, like, the reason why, we just had partners who, and I tell Brad even recently, I'm like, listen, to me, Brad Cox is the best trainer in the game. And I think his team is phenomenal. Like, pretty much his kids work for him as assistant trainers. I mean, it's just amazing. They literally are just an amazing organization. But they just didn't fit us because Brad's not in New York, more than just a little bit of time during Saratoga. And our New York horses really weren't doing quite well here. And a lot of times the owners just think, well, Brad's not here. Brad doesn't care about the small horses. He just cares about all the graded stakes. And that's really not true, because, like, if you look at all these top trainers, they win races all over the country, and they're not always at those locations. You really do just rely on having a strong team. And, Brad had that. I mean, Brad wins everywhere. Mm-hmm. But just the partners were just, they just weren't happy. And a lot of times it's just the horses we buy, like, we're going to buy bad horses. We're going to claim bad horses. It's just part of the business. So, you get emotional reactions pretty easily in this business, especially as owners. And it's understandable. I mean, these horses cost $5,000 a month to maintain. I mean, that's a lot of money. And using another analogy, I always tell my partners that owning a horse is like buying a boat that's leaking water. And you really would be kind of crazy to go out on the ocean on a boat that's leaking water, right? I mean, like, you're asking for it. But that's the reality of this business. Like, so you need to make decisions that get water out of the boat. It's the only way you're going to survive. Otherwise you're going to sink. And often, to get water out of the boat, you're going to have to take that horse that you spent a lot of money for and put him in a cheap claiming race. It is what it is. That's the horse's ability. And you can refuse to accept that. Oh, I spent $500,000 for this horse at the sale 2 years ago as a yearling, but the horse isn't that competitive, and he may have to run in a 20,000 claimer. That's okay. That's where he fits. You can't get married to what you paid at the hammer, the purchase price. If you claim a horse for $80,000, he turns out to be not very good, you make a bad claim. You have to be willing to make decisions going forward that are going to, give you an opportunity to survive. And that's the biggest challenge of running a partnership, is that people really don't accept that well. Like, they don't understand how difficult this business is. Even when you look at auctions, I think the one report I last read, it was like 60% of the horses that are bought at auction don't even make their races. I have,
and that's a lot of money that's spent on those horses.
Yeah. And, like, if you look us up historically, let's say we've purchased maybe 50 horses at auction, not counting the 2-year-olds this year. But we have like a 3-year-old who's going to debut probably about 2 weeks. And then we had one that was going to debut last week, and he actually flipped over in the paddock, Run DMZ. They're both going to start. And I would think we might have had 2 horses not make the races. Of all the horses we bought at auction, one was a horse named Battleheart. Bought this horse really cheaply for like $20,000 for Abigail Adzit back when Abigail was, starting her training career. And the horse was making its last breeze before it was going to debut. And right at the finish line, she tore a tendon and we retired her. So she was close to making a race. She didn't. Then we bought a Jumpstart colt at the Maryland sale for $75,000 off of Grassroots maybe 3 years ago. And that horse got severe colic and had surgery, had complications from the surgery, went back in for surgery, had more complications, and then the surgeon called me and said the horse ain't going to make it. All our horses make the races. We like outperform the averages. It's not even close. And people are complaining in my group that we have horses who aren't, if you tell them, hey, your horse is not going to debut until spring of the 3-year-old season, they're looking at it that as like, this is a major disappointment. Like, what do you mean we're not going to debut the spring of 3-year-old season? Like, no, that you're actually doing good if that's the case. Like, because that's how bad this sport is. It's that tough. And one
the
thing
worst you can do is rush a horse to the races, right? That destroys the horse usually, right?
The biggest mistake people make is telling a horse when he should run and not let the horse tell you when he should run. And when you buy horses at the auction, like the April sale or the Maryland sale in May, the first question these investors always ask me is this horse going to make Saratoga? And it's like, I know if I buy a horse who might not be mature enough to make it to Saratoga, it's going to turn off a lot of investors, like, because they want that horse to run in Saratoga.
As a 2-year-old.
Yeah. And it's like, it's so disappointing because like, we can't do that. We have to let the horse tell us. And if you listen to the horse, you're going to come out so far ahead. We have to have patience. I hate running horses just to run. When I have owners who say, hey, you know what? You can't make money sitting in a barn. Like I don't like accept that because like these horses are animals. When you put a horse in a race he does not belong in, you run the risk of him injuring himself at a higher degree than he already has. You usually get nothing out of it. He just runs around the track and, gets beat by 15 lengths. And, kind of like a tread on a tire. Horses can only give you so many races. And you really don't want to waste those races and take tread off of a tire running in a race you don't fit in just because maybe they're like Sonic Speed. We were willing to put him in a starter allowance because his 2 3-life 35s came off the turf. That was like the stretch. If that starter allowance didn't go, I would not put him in an open A other than allowance just because, hey, you know what? We got to run. We can't just sit in a barn. Like, you just got to sit patient sometimes. And it's okay because when you give the horse some time, usually you'll get something back on the other end of it because that horse is now going to, start to feel good and refreshed, and you might get more better efforts out of them. So that's like the biggest challenge with all this is like getting people to understand how tough this business is,
Let me say, as an owner that is into the claiming game and went with you, and this doesn't guarantee a price, but I've the most I've ever spent with you to get a decent percentage, 3 or 4% was $1,500. I spent as low as $800. NYRA's up the percentage required for parking and so forth, so someone might have to pay a little more, but that's affordable to a lot of people as opposed to multiple thousands, which is an option you've given. You just got back from Timonium and so forth, but I appreciated that. It got me to the winner's circle at Saratoga. Yeah. And so if someone is interested in considering ownership, I've got Mike's email on the screen there, or I did. Let me get it back there. Mike at ZillaRacingStables.com. Send him an email and make an inquiry, and he'll explain to you. He's got a really structured operation for claiming and getting partners for claiming. And like I said, you can, he has a minimum percentage, but you can pick the percentage as long as you go with that, at least the minimum. And when I say minimum, sometimes it's 3%, 2%, sometimes a little higher. But again, your claiming operation is very structured, very accommodating, and very affordable. And it's a tough game, but relatively successful.
Yeah,
So I'm impressed with that.
I could add something to that. So one thing that I do that's counterintuitive for Zilla as a business, when we have people come to us and they say, "Hey, I'm looking to take 5 to 10% of a horse, or I'm looking to invest $5,000 to $10,000 in a horse," I always push them to that minimum side, because even though I would prefer you buy a bigger piece or invest more, that helps us as a business, I still would rather you take the minimum of that range that you're willing to put into it. And the main reason is I would rather have you regret that you didn't buy more than regret you didn't buy less. Because I said this business is full of disappointments. And I don't know if other syndicates do this, but if you go to our website, I probably have it. I have it on the front page. I have it all over like 3 different places that most horses lose money.
Yes, you do. Yes, you do. I just reviewed your website.
And the rest barely break even. Very, very few make anything significant. But I want to also say that's not an excuse to lose money. And it's not an excuse to be inefficient. So I place so much emphasis on making sure we're being as efficient as possible. And, if I bring up like Sonic Speed, that's like, he's a classic example of a horse that's frustrating to me as a managing partner. Because, see, when we had first claimed him, I was kind of cautious from claiming out of that 2 life 30 condition on the turf. That's a really bad race. You're really running against really bad horses. And if you claim the loser out of those conditions, you're probably not going to have much horse for New York, especially if he can't run on the dirt. And like Sonic Speed cannot run on the dirt. He's been beat, 20 lengths plus multiple times over the dirt. And that was against easier horses. Now that he's actually burned a couple conditions, he'd be running in dirt against much tougher horses. So he has no ability in New York to be competitive in any race on dirt. So when you claim out of the 2 life 30 turf race here in New York, you're claiming literally like the bottom barrel horses. So if you claim a horse that doesn't run a big race, you're really in trouble. But even if you do claim the winner like we did, it's still a really tough road ahead. The next spot you go to in New York is a 3 life 35. And if you look, as soon as we claimed him, we were still like, 15-1 in a 3 life 35 after we claimed him. It's a tough race. And then you go to the starter allowance. It's, a tough race. Coming out of a 2 life 30 on the turf into a start allowance is a tough spot. So a horse like Sonic Speed, really, if you look, I think, what did we run him? Maybe 10 times. And the only time he hit the board is when he got second down in Delaware. So he's a horse that really fits down in that area. He runs competitively enough that it makes you, if everything goes right, he could win a race. But especially with turf horses, the problem is the less they fit in that race, if they're not the horse to beat, they need so many things to go right. And to have those things all go right in a turf race, these big fields are so trip dependent, pace dependent. You're just asking for a lot. So what happens? You run a nice race, you lose by 3. And you're like, well, that wasn't too bad. But you lost by 3, but you still finished 7th. And then since you ran good enough, you come back and you do it again. And then you find another excuse. Oh, he got boxed in. He got a wide trip, broke slowly. Pace was too slow. Pace was too fast, whatever. Distance was too short. Distance was too long. There's all these excuses. So when you have your horse in these spots where they're not the horse to beat, especially the turf in this kind of condition, you need more, overcome more hurdles. So he's a horse, like, for me, I believe he fits better out of town, but he's owned by New York owners who want to run in New York. So you have this challenge of, okay, we can run in these spots where we're going to look competitively, but we're probably still just a little bit too short on how much horse we have to really win the race. But if we go out of town, we're going to win races. But he's not in New York. And since everybody wants to be in New York, especially around this time of year with Saratoga, so that's a challenge with a horse like him. And this is why I was kind of reluctant to claim him. In fact, when Jeff from Playing the Field reached out to me to claim him, originally I told him, I wasn't interested for those reasons. But then I watched his replay. I think he had just stretched out going long down in Florida. And he ran a good race. I'm like, well, he's New York bred. If he does make that little move forward, maybe we got some upside. And Morley said he was doing really well. We knew we needed a race.
Yeah.
So
his credit, he's brought in some checks. He's brought in some slices. He's offset some of his upkeep, and he's raced somewhat consistently. He, knock on wood, he hasn't been injured seriously. Me being experienced in the racing game, at least because I've done the trials and tribulations, I think Sonic Speed's was a solid claim. Not a great one, but a solid one. And I've had bad ones like you. So I'm happy with that.
Yeah, and I can see why you see that. I mean, because again, he seems to lose by 3, right? But if you really look, I mean, his last 4 races, he's been 7th, 7th, and 6th. Since he left Delaware and came back, left the Delaware circuit, he's been 6th, 7th, 7th, and 7th. And before he went to Delaware, he had a 7th, a 4th, and a 6th off the claim for us.
Yeah. So the 4th was at Saratoga. I'm sorry to interrupt you. And Gary Stevens pointed out that is an unlucky horse. He had a lot of horse, and he got boxed in. We were at least going to hit second there.
Yeah. So again, that's what happens. Like, they do enough that it gives you the let's try it again, and you just keep doing it over and over. But the truth is, if you keep doing this with these types of horses in this type of class, like, you're gonna just end up like your boat's gonna sink. And you can never get out of these horses. Like, they're very challenging to get out. Like, if you claim a 2 life 30 like we did, whoever loses that race, you're never getting your 30,000 back, almost ever. And you might not even be able to get out of that horse. Even if you were to ship out of town and run like a 2 life 16 on the grass, if they write that somewhere cheaply, like Laurel or whatever, he's probably not even going to get claimed. So you really struggle to even get out, assuming you want to just move on. And a horse like Sonic Speed, if he doesn't move forward, it will be a challenge to get out. Meaning you'd have to run really cheap, but they only write so many cheap turf races out of town. So you run this, we got to be careful. Like I said, he's going the right way. Morley said he's going to need a race. And if you looked at 3 life 35, we originally entered it. I mean, we looked good in there, right? We were second choice, I think. But that race came off the turf twice, so we got unlucky there. But yeah, I mean, he'll go 3 life 35 next race. And if he can win that race, run a big race, then we can kind of entertain the New York bred allowance with him or the starter again. He's close. I said he's right there, but that's what these types of horses do. They bring you so close that you're convinced, and you just kind of keep, going back and forth in the same spot. But we're happy with him to say no reason to bail on him now. He's going the right direction, but to me, he's a frustrating horse because I think I got to say, what there's a lot of syndicate managing partners or ownership groups that wouldn't be as honest as you just were. You're on a recording, and we're going to put this out to the world, and you're being very honest, and I love that about you. In fact, folks, if you're considering, and do your research. I think Zilla's great, but there's more out there. Do your research, and one website I suggest you go to is ownerview.com, because they have a tab on there called syndicates, and they list a lot of the major syndicates, and they have ratings.
And I encourage you to read the ratings for Zilla Racing Stables. Spoiler alert: they're very good. They're superb, actually. But read the other ones as well. Do your research. Don't do something quickly. Again, reach out to Mike and make an inquiry via email. And I think if you're into you just have, and Mike's giving you a really good lesson here on you can't expect to be in the, you have to understand it's an up and down game, and you have to enjoy more than just the races and hoping to come in first or hit the board. You got to enjoy the accoutrements. You get a NYRA card, you get in for free to all the NYRA tracks and things like that. There's a lot of it. You just go to the horse and see your horse breeze. I enjoy that immensely. It helps that I live a mile from the track. So I just encourage people to do that. Mike, we were going to talk about the auctions. I think what we'll do is save that for next week, because you got a great story about the auction. Not a great story. I think every time you do it, it sounds exhausting, and that in and of itself, because it's over several days that you're there. It's not like it's Fasting Tipton at Saratoga the way I experience it. I show up, I have a beer, I have a cocktail, I watch $1 million horse, and I go home. You're there for a week or 10 days sometimes. Reintroduce yourself to your family when you finally get back. So we gotta, as a prelude to next week, we're gonna do this again, folks. And Mike has an interesting way of describing his experience at the auction. So join us again, Mike. Anything else you want to say about people getting a hold of you, or anything you said so far?
Well, one thing again is this is not a financial investment. But it's not like I said, most horses lose money, but it's not an excuse to be inefficient. There is a value on the ownership, the experience, so we do place that value on that. It's so important that an owner does. If you only look at this through a financial lens, this won't work for you. You have to appreciate that these are live, living animals. They're out there putting everything on the line for our benefit, our entertainment. And whether they win $1 million or they win a 12-5 claimer or they finish last, they get the same dinner, they go right back to the same stall, and they get a couple of peppermints and a pat on the head. Like they do it all for us, and like they get nothing back. They really don't. It's like, so all we can do is treat them as good as we can treat them, give them the best care. We've retired so many of our horses that we've provided great homes for them. We can't retire them all. If we lose a horse 3 years ago in a claiming race, and at some point, it's our responsibility as an owner, the current owner, to take care of that horse and find him a home. It should not always just be, hey, Zilla Racing or West Point owned that horse 3 years ago, so they should be the one who does this. You claim a horse, you buy a horse, it's your responsibility. It's just like a pet. If you go to the local, humane society and pick up a dog, you don't get an excuse to not take care of it because you weren't the original owner. You took the responsibility. So when you become an owner in this business, you have to be responsible when that horse is in your hands. So the thing I'd like to say is, dealing with us, the only thing I would say where to line up with us, you have to accept this. I manage as efficiently as I can. When it comes to being realistic, as you know, I'm very honest. I will tell you your horse is no good. If he's no good, I will not sugarcoat. I'm going to tell you directly what I think your horse's level is through my own assessments, my team assessments, and the trainer and their team assessments. We have a really strong track record of being pretty accurate on our assessments. So I'm going to tell you honestly where your horse is, like where he fits. The important thing to do to work with us, when it comes down to putting your horse in a race, you have to take your emotional dial and turn it to 0 and be objective. And then as soon as you put the horse in the right race, you put him where he fits. As soon as the entry comes out, take that emotional dial and turn it all the way back up as high as it goes. Because if you can do that, you can turn the emotional dial off, being realistic, put your horse where he fits. If that means you paid $500,000 for him and you're running him for 20, if that's where he fits, turn the dial off, put him where he fits, be objective, enter him in a race, turn the dial up and enjoy it, because that's where you're going to get the most out of it. And it's so important that you understand that.
That's a great closing. I'm not going to say much more. Folks, join us again next week. We're going to do this again
Right.
I think we're gonna have a pretty interesting discussion about the auction process. Mike, thanks for joining us. Mike at ZillaRacingStables.com. And again, don't forget to check Ownerview out. Do your research. Thanks, Mike. We'll be back next week, folks.
Appreciate it. Look forward to it, Dan. Thank you.
Thanks.